I'm going into my 5th year as a staffer, but even before I was a staffer, I was a volunteer here. So
yeah. Okay. So thank you so
yeah.
much.
So hi, I'm Jaggi. I'm wondering if, beyond what Joanna just said, if there's anything else that you guys in particular want to get out of this discussion. What I'm planning to do is talk about what this organization is, the different projects we do, some of the history of it, and as that happens, you'll probably have questions and stuff. But is there anything in particular that you want to know?
That's a good place to start, just the history, and then from there we'll go. Okay,
so I'm the Programming Working Groups Coordinator here. Basically, we have 3 full-time staff. We put in about 30 hours a week as staff, and we are a field levy group on campus here at Concordia. So I overheard you guys have visited the Potato, the campus, not the campus bookstore, but the co-op bookstore, Sustainable Concordia. Those are all field levy groups, which means that we're organizations that get funding directly from students. It's a certain amount of cents per credit, so we get 31 cents per credit per undergraduate student. And recently, since 2010, we've been getting a field levy from graduate students as well. So all those different groups are field levy groups, and Concordia is rich in having field levy groups. There's upwards of 13 or 14. It's not always the case on campus. The model we have here is different than some campuses, because here we have a lot of decentralized organizations that have a lot of autonomy and also have a focus on the community. And that's a reflection both of the priorities that those groups have set for themselves, like they've made the decision that being a campus group is just as important as being a community group. But it's also a reflection of a bit of the history of Concordia and the nature of Concordia. So a useful contrast is McGill, because McGill is more of a campus focused on itself. And so that will reflect, the fact that it has fewer field levy groups, etc. So we're the Quebec Public Interest Research Group, QPIRG, and there are 3 PIRGs in Quebec. There's us, McGill, and UQAM. And recently UQAM has changed their fee structure so that they're similar to ours and they have a similar budget. And there are PIRGs, as you guys were mentioning, across Canada. There's a strong OPIRG network in Ontario. There is 1 PIRG in Maritimes in Nova Scotia at Dal. There is none in Manitoba. There is 1 in Saskatchewan. There is 2 in Alberta, and I think there's 2 or 3 in BC. And there's also PIRGs in the United States, which is where they started, but the structure is very, very different. If you go to our website, and I'm going to give you our annual report, we actually write up a longer history, because a quick history of the PIRGs, Public Interest Research Groups, would always reference Ralph Nader. He started the first one in the United States, and that's true. And it was basically a consumer protection organization that he started in the 70s and was able to get funding on campuses. But the PIRGs in the US are very different now. You have PIRG Minnesota, PIRG California, PIRG New York. They're basically big NGOs, and their relationship to the campus is not there anymore. But the PIRG structure was used in Canada to basically create social justice and environmental justice centers on campus. And that's basically our mandate. I'll hand this out right away. This is like our main pamphlet. I just printed out a few. And you'll see on the first page there what our mandate is, which is rather large, but it's also kind of precise. Like, we're a resource center for student and community research and organizing. We strive to raise awareness and support grassroots activism around diverse social and environmental justice issues. Our work is rooted in an anti-oppression analysis and practice. We seek to make campus community links and inspire social change through engaging, inclusive, and non-hierarchical approaches. So that's who we say we are. That's our mandate. But what we actually do in practice is what's the most interesting, right? How do we actually put that into practice? Before going on, just in terms of the history of PIRGs and what have you, this PIRG has been on the Concordia campus since the 1980s, and it's had a fee levy since the 1990s, early 1990s. So we're well established on campus. It's more than 20 years. And when you follow the history of the kinds of issues that PIRGs, well, this PIRG in particular has followed, you kind of have a mini history of social justice struggles and what people are interested in. So for example, we really take for granted now recycling, composting, and all that other stuff. That's completely mainstream, right? Like even corporations say they recycle and what have you, but you know, in the 80s, that was considered kind of radical stuff. And PIRGs were at the forefront of what was then the emerging environmental movement, questioning pesticides, questioning you know, consumer style activism. And I think we even mentioned it, maybe not here. It's on our website. You get more detailed analysis on our website, but if you look at some of the groups that have grown up from PIRG to go on to be their own organization, some examples are Equiterre, Centre Port Roulant. Now, they weren't called Centre Port Roulant or Equiterre while they were here, but they had their germination here. Another example is Cinema Politica. I'm not sure if you've heard of Cinema Politica, but
yeah, we run the Cinema Politica locale at Bishops.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that used to, because the flagship Cinema Politica is Concordia. It's like the biggest Cinema Politica. They have screenings every week. It started as a radical film series here, right? So groups start here and they go on to grow up and be other things. But in the 80s, you have a major concern for environmental issues. You'd also see issues like opposing apartheid in South Africa. There always seems to be trends in terms of international solidarity. In the 80s, there was a lot of work around Central America, especially because of American foreign policy in places like Nicaragua, El Salvador, etc. And that continues into the 90s. But a lot of PIRGs, and our PIRG is an example of that, also began to adopt an anti-oppression analysis, which means, it's a huge topic, but basically means a focus on confronting racism, sexism, patriarchy, homophobia, ableism, the understanding that you know, in society, you know, we want good things and we're against bad things, but we have to sort of name the systems of power, name the systems of oppression. And those systems of power and oppression are racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. And so there's a focus on that as well, and that developed. So, and that sometimes is a bit of a tension with some of the environmental movements that don't talk about that. And so different PIRGs move in different directions, and our PIRG definitely moved in the direction of a clear anti-oppression analysis, which is reflected in our mandate. So that's reflected in some of the issues in the 90s. But also in the late 90s and early 2000s, you have people involved in what was then called the anti-globalization movement, which was always a bit of a misnomer in my mind. It's more of a global justice movement, so the people opposing things like the North American Free Trade Agreement, the World Trade Organization, things associated with the protests in Seattle in 1999, Quebec City in 2001. And as you'll see, if you look at our working groups, and we have more than 28 right now, like the issues that this PIRG is involved with is quite diverse: police brutality, migrant justice, prison justice, gentrification, radical schooling, racial profiling, and on and on. So that's just a bit of a trajectory of how this takes. This is Fred, by the way. He's with the Anarchist Book Fair Collective, which is one of our working groups. And the people in that other room who gave us the coffee and donuts are with a group called the Prisoner Correspondence Project, which maintains correspondence with literally hundreds of prisoners, but prisoners identified as gay, trans, and dealing with those specific needs that prisoners have by being trans or gay in the prison system. And they maintain correspondence in the pen pal program. So there's so much I can mention. There's so much that happens out of here, but just an idea of who's lurking in the space. So that's just by way of history and the mandate. Different PIRGs make different decisions vis-a-vis the issues they focus on, how much capacity they have. That all depends on your budget and your money and your staff. So there's a sort of a decision PIRGs make about whether they're sort of campus-based or more community-based. We're definitely seen as one of the more community-based PIRGs. We actually, our slogan is your campus community link for social change. And the way we've defined it internally is sort of 50-50. We want to be doing about half of our activities that are focused on students and about half focused on the community. But when I say that, I want to be really clear that it's a bit of a false dichotomy, because when you're a student, you're part of the community. And we really see, especially at Concordia, community as helping and nurturing a better university, right? So it's just to give you examples of how that looks in practice at Concordia in general, like People's Potato does not discriminate. You don't have to show your student card to get access to the meals. Anybody can. So homeless folks in the neighborhood come by and access those meals. On some campuses, it's a lot more insular, right? Like you're the student, and if you're not a student, you don't belong there, and it's really clear. Even the geography of our campus is different, right? Because we're kind of integrated into downtown, so you'd be walking around, and students, you can't really profile that easily who might be a student. And at Concordia, there's a demographic of people as students who are more working class, sometimes the first people in their families to go to university, people who have non-traditional paths to university. So the traditional path is you finish high school, you go to university, you finish in 4, maybe 5 years, and then you do something else. But the non-traditional paths are people who are adult students, single moms, working parents, people who might not have, they might have finished high school later in life and gone to school. And clearly there are people here also more traditional path as well, but that mix makes this an interesting place and makes the fact that our mandate is both campus and community something that's welcomed by our membership. And our membership is Concordia community as well as the broader Montreal community. Any questions so far?
Pretty great description of what's going on.
Okay. So, we do, and this might be something you want to return to because we do it more systematically. I'm kind of covering this quite quickly, but we do monthly workshops called Solidarity, Not Charity, an Intro to Organizing in Montreal. And just with the very title, you get a sense of where we're coming from because we reject the idea of charity approaches to social change that, people who have power and privilege and think of themselves as being able to help other people. Rather, social change happens when different peoples and different struggles unite and support each other. It's not a vertical relationship, but a horizontal relationship. It's easier said than done, of course, but that's our approach, and that's how we decide who we fund, who we support. And so we do those monthly workshops, and in those workshops we talk about our grassroots anti-oppression organizing framework. And I'll throw it up here because it's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But that kind of orients where we're coming from, and it's the way our mandate plays out in practice.
Yeah. No, I really identify with that. I mean, I just came back from the Power Shift conference in Ottawa, and that seemed to be framed in the same way with a grassroots anti-oppression approach.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure there were people from QPIRG who were involved in organizing that. I mean, because I know Concordia, it's the same with Concordia. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to repeat the workshop just because of lack of time, but by organizing we mean that we're not just a talk shop. Like, it's good to talk and people should talk, but we believe in the idea of organizing, getting out there and organizing in a very diverse way, right? So for example, the Prisoner Correspondence Project, they don't organize demonstrations, but they're organizing. They're in touch with prisoners in the U.S. They're figuring out ways to effectively communicate with them, getting resources, copying those resources. Right now they're having an orientation because they get such a volume of mail. And they're a flagship project. This is the only place where you have that kind of prisoner correspondence project. So like different ways of organizing, but clearly some of the traditional ways of organizing demonstrations, talks, popular education, with the idea of people coming together and actually doing stuff. And anti-oppression is, I've already alluded to what that is, like rooting that in the idea of confronting racism and sexism and homophobia, naming our forms of oppression. It's not good enough to say we want good things, we're against bad things. It's not enough to say that some political party will take care of it for us or some leader will take care of it for us. It's like analyzing those systems of power. And grassroots is really emphasizing that it's not major think tanks or NGOs that do it, it's actually groups of people coming together and organizing and linking up. So that's our framework. And it orients like all that we do. So any questions about that so far? So how that plays out in practice is, we kind of have to decide what to focus on and what not to focus on because we have limited resources and time. And I feel like we do a lot with the budget we have. We get the equivalent of $250,000 a year through the fee levy, which is roughly what every feel-every group gets. Some get a little bit more, some get a little bit less. But that's roughly the equivalent, and I feel like we do a lot with that. So we have core projects. We have our programming. We have working groups, WGs. I'll put here office, and I'll put here, what's the other thing I'm forgetting now? Oh, discretionaries and endorsements. I guess before going to that, I just want to quickly mention our structure because we're a fee-levy group. There are certain requirements. You need to be registered with the norme des Régie des entreprises du Québec. So whether you're a corporation, whether you're a nonprofit society, you need to be registered. So we're registered legally. We're a legal entity. Similarly, you need to have a board of directors, you need to have annual general meetings, etc. So we have a 12-person board of directors, 6 students and 6 community members. They're elected every year at an AGM, an annual general meeting. And they basically are the people who are legally responsible for the organization. They meet every 2 weeks, and they're making the key decisions. And again, they're voted in by our membership at an annual general meeting. Our membership being students who show up to that meeting, and community members who get defined if they put in about 10 hours of volunteer work, and that can be through our core projects, through our working groups, through anything. So, and then we have staff. So we have 3 core staff, but we sometimes get work studies where students can do a job. We get grants from the government, etc. And then of course volunteers, working groups, etc. But it's important to note that fact that there's an accountability mechanism built into this. So we have audited statements every year. We produce an annual report. I have 2 copies here, so I'll leave them with you. This is our recent annual report for the past year. We have internal policy about how we hire, etc. And that accountability is really, really important because we're dealing with money that's not our money. It's through a fee levy. And you need to have practices of fairness within the organization. It can't just be you hire your friends. It can't just be you're giving money because you like somebody, you don't like somebody. You have to have guidelines, you have to have internal practice. So we have policies about hiring, about what working groups. And so the issue isn't that you can't be left-wing or you can't be radical. The issue is within what you've defined as your mandate, you're fair and accountable. Because the ways in which you can be attacked as a group on campus or anywhere in society that takes stances that are considered radical or out there is you can be attacked on your actual position. That happens. I mean, we're a group, for example, that supports Israeli Apartheid Week, has taken very strong pro-Palestinian stances. That results in certain kinds of attacks. But the sort of the weak end is when you're not accountable financially, like you've lost money, you're not saying where the money's spent, or when people feel like you're being unfair or not doing what you say you do. So as long as you're clear about what you do and you do it, then you can deal with the attacks. And then if people don't like it, they can come to an AGM and vote in a new board. Mm-hmm. So that's really, really important for us, and that's why we produce the annual report. We have audited statements, we have minutes of our meetings. Policy is a huge component that I can't get into here because I'm going into more of the public face of QPIRG, but that's something to acknowledge. So the things that QPIRG does that are our main things are our core projects, and we have 6 of them. We could have 12, but we don't have the capacity to do that. So this is where I start showing you stuff. One of our core projects is our alternative libraries, and I'll give you the bookmark for that. And basically it's our library, which is in the small room there. It's a holding library. The library puts on events sometimes, book launches, etc. But it's basically an alternative, books and zines and other materials. You can keep the extras. Books, zines, and other materials that reflect our mandate, right? So we're going to have a huge section on feminism, on gender, on Native, Indigenous rights issues, right? And we seek that out, and we seek out films and other things. So that's the alternative library. The interesting thing about the alternative library is that we've joined up with QPIRG McGill and other small libraries like that to create a database called alternativelibraries.org. So you can search that database of 6 or 7 and find these materials. So it's not just us physically here, but a bunch of spaces. So that's one of our core projects. Another one is producing this every year. I only have 2 copies left, but I'll give them to you. It's called School Schmool, and actually started at QPIRG McGill, but it's an alternative agenda. It has a listing of community groups, some of them you visited, and, both on campus and off campus. It has articles on issues like consent, taking care of yourself, tuition hikes, knowing your rights, gentrification, misogyny, women of color, feminism. It has and it has just an agenda, and it's completely ad-free and it has beautiful artwork, as you'll see. So I'll give you guys the 2 that I have left. But we produced that at the beginning of the year, and it's like basically a way of having in one space all these access to all these kind of interesting issues and ideas that reflect our mandate, but also having a useful agenda. Because the agendas produced by the student councils are just for, I mean, you open it up and credit card ads fall out. There's often sexist advertising. I mean, it panders to the, like, see, there's 2 ways of looking at a student, and I'm not saying either way is right or wrong, but it's just that we're multifaceted, right? But when you get those agendas, it's like they're assuming that you want to buy clothes, spend money on your credit card, that you're into sexist advertising, and you want to drink a lot of beer. And maybe there are people who want to do that, but there's more to that stereotype, right? That corporate attitude where you're being fed ways of getting you into the corporate system. And so that's an alternative, like School Schmool, which is, hey, maybe you can check out these other kinds of things that are going on. And so it's kind of countering that. So that's our second core project. A third...
Does the student union also distribute those for you guys?
No, they produce their own.
Oh, okay. Even though you're funded by...
We're not funded by...
Or the fee levy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah.
To clarify that
yeah.
we're autonomous of both the administration and of the student union. We are not run by the student union. The only link is that when we want to increase our fee levy, we do it with a referendum at the same time as the elections for the student union.
Yeah.
The last time we did that was like 5 years ago, so it happens rarely. And the only link to the administration is that they're the ones who hand over our money, because they'll calculate how many students actually registered, and they'll calculate that after the drop deadline, and then we get the money. But technically we're autonomous of both. Not just technically, but in reality, and that's something we really encourage. That's not the structure at a lot of places where everything has to go through a student union. They're the ones who are the club, or everything has to go through the administration. And that's, I feel, a power of Concordia. Now, a lot of administrations have noticed that leads to students sort of being able to be engaged more autonomously and have clamped down.
Yep.
The way that's happened at McGill is they have an online opt-out, which means that anybody can just press a button online and opt out of the fee. And that's sort of really put a dent into their funding at both CKUT, the radio station, and also QPIRG McGill, because it leads to like smear campaigns. So like pro-Israeli students were saying this group supports Hamas and Hezbollah, which is not true, but they said it, and people, I don't like that, I'm gonna opt out. The way our opt-out works is people have to come to our office after the drop deadline for a week, and we give them back their money. And, you know, some people might come, that's fine. If you don't agree with us, you can opt out. But to put it online is a way of undermining the funding base. But we're definitely autonomous of those structures. So that was so we're producing that. We produce about we distribute about 1,000 copies, School Schmool, on campus. They produce like maybe 5,000, 6,000, but people don't like it. They don't use it.
Yeah.
It's like so.
But I gotta say, I actually have a School Schmool, and like I remember when I went through it the first time, I was like, this is so good. It's like everything, instead of like Googling like a place, to find a place where you feel like your perspective is legitimate or whatever, or like-minded, that it basically is like they've already filtered everything, so it's good.
Yeah,
and informative. It tells you where it is, it gives you contact information.
Yep.
And the philosophy, or like the idea here around the fee levy groups and the way QPIRG sees it, is that we're not pretending that every student agrees with our issues. Far from it. I don't think the people's potato is pretending that every student wants a vegetarian meal every day, or Frigo Vert, which is the natural health food store, assumes that everybody should be a vegetarian. But the idea is that all of these things contribute to the campus and its community, especially at a university setting where we should be pushing the envelope. So those are good things that's happening. So the third core project, I should get through these, is disorientation. I have nothing to give you for disorientation, but it's basically, it's written up a bit in the projects and activities, but it's basically a week-long series of events in September, which complements School Schmoo. It's like a series of events that's an alternative orientation. And clearly the kinds of events that we choose to put on is very different than your traditional orientation, which is basically an excuse to get drunk in a lot of places. And wrapped up with a lot of other nasty stuff, right, that people don't really question. Like, we like to have fun too, and we might have alcohol at some of our events, but it's definitely a whole other culture of learning, getting to know each other, and it's both for the community and the campus. So this year we did a open air tabling fair where we just took over the street. We bring in speakers, we do workshops, we have films, we collaborate with Cinema Politica, etc. They're just doing a training for the Prisoner Correspondence Project. So there's 3 other core projects, and they're all kind of linked together, the 3 more that I haven't talked about yet, with something else that we do here, which is we promote the idea of community-based social justice research. And that's sort of the research part of our mandate that's into practice. And the idea of a community-based social justice research model is that research is often seen as something that's really intimidating. It's seen as something that's specialized, professional, in the hands of experts. It's academic. And if you just break down the word research, it means knowledge work. It means anything that we do in our lives to gain knowledge. And it can mean, you know, a mathematician or a biologist that has very specialized knowledge about things that are really important. But it also means the things that people do in their day-to-day lives to survive. And those people kind of get written out of research and knowledge work. So if you're surviving to put food on a table, if you're, you know, raising kids, if you're, you know, there's different ways we're doing knowledge work in our community groups, but also ourselves. So it's a way of validating that idea. And we do that in different ways. So we have a project called Study in Action. I'll pass you the, and you're welcome to contribute to this, by the way. Study in Action is an undergraduate and community research conference. And basically, we get out into classrooms. We encourage undergrads specifically, because they're not seen as, they don't see themselves as being researchers, but we say, look, you might have written a paper, you might have been really proud about what you wrote, or you enjoyed the topic. Why don't you consider presenting that paper at a conference, and we'll set you up on panels with other people on that issue. So, for example, people might do a class on international development, and they wrote a paper on a given issue, and we'll find a community group that can link up, and we bring those folks together. It's a way of encouraging undergrads to share their research, but to link it up with very practical community work. So that's Study in Action. We do that every year. That conference has been around now for 5 years. And both community groups and students come together. Plus, something that's linked to Study in Action now is Art in Action, which is developed. And we had an exhibit this past week that just ended yesterday, which is why our space is messy and you see some of the artwork up. But we encourage artists also to engage in social justice and environmental justice work through this conference. We also have something called the Community University Research Exchange, which is a database of over 100 community groups that have research needs. Grassroots community groups. So we're not asking like a major funded NGO to give their research needs because they can pay for it. But you have groups in town like Girls Action Fund, for example, that needs research done, but they can't do it because they don't have the capacity. They're a very grassroots group, or Rock Camp for Girls, or the Collective Opposed to Police Brutality. So they put in their research needs, like they define projects, and students can do those projects. And what we do through the Community University Research Exchange is help students link with those community groups, and often they can get credit for that in their courses. So it's kind of like a plus all around. But it's another way in which we're encouraging the community social justice research model. And something that's emerged out of all of that is producing this journal called Convergence. So I'll give you all a copy.
Cool.
And basically, people who complete QPIRG projects to the Community Research Exchange, or people who do presentations at Study in Action, we choose some of them and we highlight them in Convergence. That's a third edition. This is the first one that we produced a couple years ago. We only have one left. And this is last year's. And last year's, it's all online, by the way. The websites and things are in the pink pamphlet, but you can get full copies of both of these online. But in the second one, there's an article on community-based social justice research, and it'll just explore more, like it's a full article about what this model means. So those are our 6 core projects. That's what we as staff spend a lot of time doing, and we evaluate every year through a visioning meeting with our board about should we add a project, is this really still working, and what have you. But right now our capacity is at those 6 projects, but that's far from everything that we do. On a regular basis, we're organizing programming. For example, coming up, we're organizing in conjunction with Frigo Vert and the People's Potato an anti-colonial Thanksgiving. So we really question the narrative that you get from the traditional Thanksgiving of colonists coming over and the native people welcoming them, teaching them how to eat turkey or whatever, but rather saying, look, we need to explore in detail the way in which native people have been displaced, the process of genocide. So it's tradition now to organize anti-colonial Thanksgiving. We do book launches, we bring in speakers, films. That's a fairly regular thing. Working groups, though, that's a whole other side. It can be seen as like our 7th core project, but it's bigger than that. And on the front side of the pamphlet, you see a description of our projects and stuff, but on the other side is a listing of all our working groups. And working groups are basically anywhere from 3 or 4 people to groups of like 100 people that work on specific issues. And they get supported by us, by funding, by storage, etc. So all the kind of mess you see here is from the working groups who work here, right? So Prisoner Correspondence Project right now is doing a training. Well, we have the Certain Days calendar that's produced here, which is a calendar for political prisoners. Solidarity Across Borders, which is a migrant justice group. The lounge here, the computers, this is all space at their disposition. So you have a listing of the groups there, but I'll give you this, which is a journal called At the Heart of Resistance. And it's basically our working groups journal. And this is the last one we produced last year in January. And we're going to be producing another one this coming January. And we ask our working groups to provide articles on different issues that they're involved with. And you see it reflected in the journal there. That's a huge component of what QPIRG is doing, supporting those groups. And we have guidelines about the kinds of groups we support. So we moved away from the environmental focus, although there are a couple of environmental groups, because that's well covered elsewhere. We want to support groups that wouldn't get support elsewhere, and that's reflected in the kinds of topics of issues, right? So we have a group called the RAD School, which questions the idea of formal schooling and wants to seek alternatives for kids.
Yeah.
There's a lot of prison justice groups out of the PIRG. It's not surprising because that's the kind of thing that will be terribly popular in mainstream society, but we feel it's important to support it, etc. By the way, I'm going to give you our QPIRG posters. Get them up in Sherbrooke somewhere. Yeah. I mean, we maintain this office space. That's another component. So I'm just going to finish up the last 2 things I have here. Like we're a public office. We're open 12 to 6 Monday to Thursday, and we're open for meetings. So even if you're not a working group, even if you're not a core project, even if you're not doing programming, students on campus are welcome to come here and use our Wi-Fi, use their computers, use the space, get advice about what to do. Like I said, we organize monthly Solidarity Not Charity workshops. We also organize monthly community-based social justice research workshops. It's a way of helping activate people. And we really see multiple levels of how people can get engaged, because we want to be a space where somebody who's curious can get involved without being intimidated. So we try to do programming like films or introductory workshops where people can just feel like, I don't have to be an expert already, I don't have to be the perfect activist to get involved. This is something that's welcoming to me. But we also do things that are for people who are more seasoned or that are more in-depth, portrayals. We balance both. And we balance that in terms of introductory to like less introductory, and we balance that in terms of community and campus. Trying to do both. We don't get involved though in student politics in terms of student council. We do get involved in student politics, especially more recently in terms of the strike. So this was a space, for example, that was a conversion center for folks. They could borrow a megaphone, they could borrow the sound system that we have. and get support for what they were doing. And when the neighborhood assemblies emerged out of the Casserole, we supported that as well, because that was fully within our mandate of anti-oppression approaches, grassroots organizing, etc. And then discretionaries and endorsements. Even if you're not a working group or it's not a core project, there are groups that are approaching us all the time for funding. So every 2 weeks, the board is able to provide modest funding of like $50 to $200 or $300 for given projects, and they decide based on the request and based on whether it fits in with their mandate. And sometimes groups just want an endorsement, right? They want to know that QPIRG supports them, so we can endorse them and we can put it out on our Facebook, on our email list, etc. By the way, this was the pamphlet for the library. I'll give you that. And
So we don't know that.
this is just our card, so you can have it. So there's a lot more I can say, but I've said quite a bit. And if you guys have any questions based on what I've said so far.
How do you differ from McGill's branch of QPIRG? You said there's a cultural difference.
I think there's a campus cultural difference that QPIRG McGill has to spend more time dealing with the university. For example, their university questioned whether they can use the name McGill. Their building is a university building. This building here, we pay rent. It's a private building, so that gives us, we have to pay the rent, but it gives us more autonomy. We don't have to worry about the university saying, well, you can't do this, too controversial. But it's a good question because it allows me to say that we collaborate a lot with QPIRG McGill. So Alternative Libraries database is together. We produce Convergence together. QPIRG is a core project together. Study and Action Conference happens at Concordia, but McGill participates in it. School Schmool was their thing, and then we joined on. So wherever we can see a linkage that makes sense for both campuses, we do it, and it's not like a competition. And we are slowly going to be integrating UQAM into this as well, because they got a fee levy and they're now capable of doing it. But Concordia is a lot more chill, I guess, in terms of its culture. It's not like, if you don't have Concordia students on every little committee you have, people are going to freak, but at McGill, they do. And, McGill is more of a traditional 4-year and you're out campus. Concordia is more part-timers, more people of non-traditional backgrounds. And for me, that just makes Concordia a more interesting place. There's also a history of, there's a history of radical organizing at McGill, but more so at Concordia, like the NAHU riot back in 2002, the Computer Center riot in 1969. There's just a lot of things that are part of Montreal's history that came out of Concordia.
Are the fee levies the only source of funding for QPIRG Concordia, or are there other donors?
No, they are.
Oh.
Yeah, that's all we need. We could look for alternative sources of funding, but we don't feel like we need to.
Cool.
And the fee levy is stable. So we get approximately $250,000 from our undergraduate fee levy and approximately $10,000 more with our grad fee levy. But